Admit all.
What's up, everybody? Hey, Clayton.
That's okay.
Hey, Eric, what's going on?
Not too much. Good to see you here.
Yeah, nice to see you too. What's up, Blas?
Clayton, how you doing, man?
Doing well.
Excellent. Excellent. It looks dark and cold outside. Is it true?
It is. It was deceiving today. It was sunny and 20s. So
All right.
Looked a lot warmer than it was.
All right.
I had that same problem today.
See.
I'm up in Michigan. I looked out the window and it was sunny and I was like, oh, it'll be beautiful out. No, not at all. Painful. The air hurts.
Yeah, Los Angeles, it was a chilly 55 this morning. Didn't quite know what to do with myself.
Boo-hoo, Blas.
Not cool.
Boo-hoo.
Not cool.
Yeah.
Best
all right,
way
so-
to get over to England. It's much colder.
How's it over there, Ben?
It's freezing. You
It's
guys have got
freezing.
it right. Yeah.
Good. Glad to hear it. So Eric, I think we can sort of get started. It's a couple minutes after. We didn't ask anyone to RSVP or anything like that. So we're looking at close to 20 people, which is great. But everyone on the call, Eric and I have gotten to know each other these past several months, and we've gotten on the phone a couple times. And he's one of these people that I always get energized whenever we talk, and it's fun to brainstorm with him. And today we're playing around a little bit with the structure. So one thing we've heard from our partners through all our talks is it's sort of difficult to find a way to move things from theory to practice, right? How do we find applications of these ideas in real life? And today with Eric, we'll do a couple of real life case studies of leverage. And Eric, hopefully we can start maybe just a little intro on yourself and Zarly and the recent book, which is just awesome, by the way. And for everyone on the call who hasn't picked it up or read it yet, it's well worthwhile. So Eric, I'll toss it over to you and we can go from there.
Cool. Yeah, I'll do just super quick intro. My day job is product strategy at Zarly, which is a marketplace for home services. I've been working on that for like 8 or 10 years. And my night job is author of a book called The Almanack of Navalmanack, which just came out pretty recently, and I assume why most people are here. And one of the things that book did, the book was a compilation of Naval Ravikant's kind of like past 10 years of wisdom. He's an investor and a founder and Twitter philosophizer. And I had learned a lot from him kind of over my lifetime, and all of that was in like podcast and Twitter format. So I just kind of transformed that into a book to hopefully make it a little more timeless and help people who aren't Twitter and podcast people kind of access that and spread it around the world. And that's freely available on the website. And one of the most interesting concepts to me that was kind of left after I finished creating the book was this concept of leverage that, is a mental model that we were probably all familiar with beforehand, but Naval did kind of like a quick layer 1 analysis and triage on and labeled a few kind of concepts within leverage. He said there's like 3 broad categories and kind of like alluded to some like explanations of it. And it really just kind of like, to me, opened a door that I wasn't totally sure was there, that I think has a lot of explanatory power and actually a huge amount of kind of like predictive power if you can reverse engineer the playbook and start to see how to kind of use this and apply it and use it as like a problem solving sort of triage mechanism. So this has been the thing that I've kind of like picking at, since the book came out. And I'm really excited to have a group like this that I can kind of put the mess in my head in front of and have you guys like productively attack it. Cause I think this is a crew that like gets mental models and gets leverage kind of as a piece of that. And what I really want to do, is like Blas said, kind of help try to close that gap between, it feels good to read about this versus it feels good to apply it. And sometimes that takes, the right framework and the right questions. And that's kind of what I've been working on with leverage. So I would love to I've got a couple slides that I'll go through because I think visual aids help here. But I'd really like to spend the most of the time here if we can, like trying to apply this to at least one person's problems and hopefully multiple we can go through like as case studies. And it might be a little like intellectually messy, but I hope that we can do it, and I hope it's productive. And I'd rather be like messy and fun and learn something than pretend to be an expert in a thing that I'm still like very much trying to learn. And hope you guys will stick with me on that. So just put this deck together like a few hours before. So this is, although I do not know much more about design than you'll see here, this is as good as it gets. And I wanted to start with the latticework mental model thing. So I think, the obligatory Archimedes quote, whenever anybody mentions leverage is, give me a lever long enough and a place to stand and I'll move the world, which is true if your lever is like 200 million light years long. But this is pulling from the latticework stuff, and latticework has a page on leverage, and it's got a cool, a couple quotes from, it talks about Steve Jobs and like the high dynamic range and how, some jobs are inherently more leveraged than others as far as outcome goes. Talks about managerial leverage from Andy Grove's book, High Output Management. So that's a cool resource and starting place. And I like, start where we're familiar and kind of go off from there. But more kind of close to home and applicable than Archimedes is just the question of like, can any of us lift 100 pounds by ourselves? I've been lifting a long time and my answer is still no. But if you gave me an 18-foot lever, like any of us could do it. And what I try to generalize that into like a bit broader of a mental model is, can you reach 1,000 people? And you can with the right 1,000 retweets. Translating that like visually to a lever, we're just trying to get to a mental model where like you're trying to move what seems like a heavy, maybe impossibly big output. You have a length of lever arm and you have an input, which is what you individually are pretty much limited to. We have the same 24 hours. We all have roughly the same, like, brains and bodies, but we have very different amounts of leverage. And so looking for how to extend those lever arms where we have levers and where we don't. And the mental model leverage, I think the forces of input here can be like, we can think of it as judgment. So, whether you make an investing decision that you then try to lever, whether it's effort, like amount of work, amount of hours, whether it's your skills, all of those things I think are fair game for leverage mental model force multiplication. So something like, how do you earn $40,000 a year indefinitely without lifting a finger? Like if you're in a coma, is impossible on a 1 in 1 out basis, but with a long enough lever arm, in this case, like what is your principal? With $1 million principal, like you don't have too much trouble reaching that. So this is like the capital version of the lever. And I think, it is increasingly true that maybe you had to be a monarch in the past, but like a modern person can stand on top of a mountain of levers now. And so you can have capital leverage, you can have tool leverage, you can have people leverage, and we're going to go through each of these types a little bit. But I think some of the extreme outcomes that you see, or the incredibly productive people, like the household names that we all know, you can look at their output as sort of composed of different types of levers, whether that's people working for them, whether that's money invested in them, whether that's tools at their disposal. Those are all individual forms of levers, and you can kind of you can reverse engineer it to understand what's happening. And you can also, I think, engineer your way towards more leverage, and use this to solve a problem, find a bottleneck, get over a hump, something like that. So this is a modification of Naval's kind of initial classification, but I think there's broadly 4 types of leverage. There's tools, that might start with like a hand axe. But I think, we have very complicated tools now, like cars and computers, that still count as tools, but we can do incredible things with those. Capital, certainly a form of leverage, a couple different sources of capital there. I changed it from labor leverage to people leverage, because I think if we do that, we can kind of more easily include, not just employees, but also contractors, audience, customers, fans, consultants, agencies, all of these things. Anytime you're using someone else's kind of complementary talents or judgments or something like that, you're using people leverage. And then products. So it starts with code, media, these things that are like zero marginal cost of replication, can be kind of infinitely extensible. So trading algorithms here, podcasts, what we're doing here, where, we're recording something and that'll get shared, a book that's written once that can be continuously reprinted or digitally reproduced. And then there's something that I'm still kind of trying to understand. That's like, there's these complicated, there's like bundles of levers, like vendors or platforms or something like that. So like Amazon obviously has all of these things, and you can take advantage of that platform that is all four of these types of leverage bundled up as a service that you can. So suppliers, platforms, vendors, I think all kind of fit this. Like, I don't know, they're not any one of those categories, but they're huge leverage, and they're how you see, 1 to 10 people build, $10 to $100 million businesses, because they use these bundles of leverage, like platforms and suppliers and things like that.
And Eric, can I jump in there with one question?
Yeah, this is a great spot.
Scott Adams talks a little bit about a talent stack, right? So you might not be the most talented person in finance or cartoons or writing, but through the combination of those three, like Scott Adams sort of admits himself, he's not world-class in any of them, but that combination, that alloy, makes something pretty special. Going back to what you're saying about this, like bundles of levers, is there space there to think about it in that frame through a talent stack where this lever and this lever are not too common, and when combined, it could produce, something, some extreme output that is not predicted?
Yeah, I mean, I think of the skill stacking as more something closer to the specific knowledge that Naval talks about, which is, I think a precursor to wanting to apply leverage, which is maybe the right place to start with this, is you got to know what you're doing, and you got to know that what you're doing has a positive outcome. Because if you lever a bad outcome, it's going to happen more of it and sooner and faster, and everything's going to be terrible. So what you have to get to first is like maybe stack those skills, start small enough to know that you are turning a profit, that you have product market fit, in the startup parlance, that you have, a trading algorithm that is productive and earns and things, before you put a ton of capital leverage behind it, or, certainly before you take on debt to buy tools to continue to produce the product. You want to know that the product is selling. So I think that it's an iterative process between having confidence in your outcome and wanting to apply more leverage to it. And most of what I'm going to talk about kind of assumes that you are in a place where you want to continue to apply leverage, like you are seeing enough good results that you want those results to happen, faster or bigger, more of them in parallel, some of those sorts of things. So it's more about unlocking speed and growth and scale than it is orienting yourself to the market, or creating those skills in the first place. Yeah,
it's interesting. And from a financial perspective, leverage is seen as risk a bunch, right? Because if you take on debt and then you get either a highly, extreme outcome either way. I haven't thought of it like this before, but something like Twitter or these types of platforms that you can scale and grow, it can give you that incredible reach, but it can also open the door to incredible criticism and negativity and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think there is always a downside risk to leverage, right? Like in the case of Twitter, it's more exposure. But I don't think it is not always perfectly even. So there's ways to kind of asymmetrically, like, you get more upside for the downside that you choose. I think, and there's a payback period and there's a margin associated with each of these forms of leverage. And, if you buy a machine to produce a widget, whether you bought that with profits or with debt, have very different implications for like the amount of risk that you take on. And then whether that payback period is 1 year or 10 years have very different implications for the amount of risk that you take on. So I think that there's a little bit of a calculation to run with each of those. And you get kind of increasingly precise each time. But I think there are some asymmetries around, there are people for whom Twitter is way more dangerous than it is productive, and vice versa. Right. But yeah, I think there are, to your previous question, there are ways to apply leverage differently to different things, that even if you do start with the same product or the same idea, you can apply leverage in such a way that it becomes a competitive advantage. And we see people with, with bigger audiences or more capital or better tools doing the exact same thing that competitors are doing and achieving, 10, 100, 1,000 times the output. Right.
Yep. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions here. This is a great stopping point for questions, challenges.
Actually, I have a question.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a question, but I was actually thinking about advertising actually as a form of leverage. Recently, I was kind of using advertising, and I think a point you make, I think, is really important, and I wish I had heard it before I did this, which is, the advertising was part of a strategy I was doing to bring something to market. I started advertising before I had a single sale, right? So to your point, I think if you think about advertising as a form of leverage, it's something you would apply only after you've had success, which I think is a key insight that I think a lot of people in the e-com game or the dropshipping game should probably kind of know about,
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, especially if you don't, you want to validate the product before you buy it, let alone before you invest in selling it. Or if you needed to run the ads to validate it, you can do that before you even buy the product, right? So yeah, I think that's a good, that's maybe the biggest risk is like applying leverage to something that you don't know is worth doubling down on, right?
Right.
Michael.
Yeah. I just want to jump in here. Well, I wanted to go back to what Blas was saying about Scott Adams and sort of talent stack or whatever. And I do think there's something to be said about sort of process or design leverage, right? Which is like, so if you have to take Costco as an example, right? Costco has the same sort of access to real estate and space. They have the same forklifts as Walmart does and Amazon, but it's inherently a more leverageable model just because of the way it's set up. So, Walmart sells only 4,000 SKUs in any given warehouse compared to Walmart selling 400,000, right? So the business complexity of the Walmart model is so much more complex and so much labor intense because you have to hire people that go into the stock room and then actually physically hang SKUs on hooks or put them on shelves. Whereas Costco, you just drive a forklift into place and dump it down and customers take it off the crate, right? So there is something to be said, I think, about leverage by design. It's it goes back to sort of Henry Ford and that's management's job is to provide an intelligent design and intelligent processes. And so I think there's maybe a meta layer that goes over this, which is it's the proper synthesis of all these types of leverage into a design that works systemically well.
Yeah, I think that's I think you can use this mental model at the company level as well as the team level and as well as the individual level, right? So something that I don't know, Silicon Valley talks about a little bit is kind of looking at basically the acquisition size over the size of the team at time of acquisition. And so that's something that we've seen kind of pretty steadily come down. So Instagram famously acquired it for $1 billion and there's 10 people. And that wasn't possible 10 years before, WhatsApp was 50 people for 20 billion or whatever. And so I think there's, you won't see that dynamic range at Costco, but I bet if you did, revenue over or market cap over headcount, you'd see that Costco was significantly more efficient, per employee. And I think it comes down to decisions like that are simplifying decisions around SKUs or around inventory management or around things like that. So the simpler the process, and I imagine those were very deliberate trade-offs around hey, we're going to invest in tools or we're going to limit SKUs or we're going to do these things because we want to have higher employee productivity, higher sales per employee. And that's the difference between in some companies that may be spending a lot on tools versus spending on humans to do more of the manual things or, investing in an outsourced call center versus internal support processes and Jeff Bezos pushing internal APIs so that teams communicate with each other through structured communications instead of human communications, things like that.
I'll jump in here real quick with one other example from Glen Eyre. And something that makes us really unique is we keep a huge inventory. And most of our competitors and almost everyone in this field runs really lean. They don't want inventory. They want to ship things out as quickly as possible. they don't pay their vendors and their suppliers for 90 days, et cetera, et cetera. We run really fat, let's say. So we keep a ton of stock in inventory. And if you think about what we call a bill of material, so these are the 10 things that are needed to create this one component, right? If you imagine if each one of those 10 things had a 90% chance of being made on time, the chance that the overall build is actually made on time is like 50%, right? And 90% in a manufacturing environment is pretty good. But the probability of 90% of 90% of 90% gets you a pretty suboptimal place. So what we've done is, by keeping all these things in inventory, it's like building a Lego set and you have all the pieces. Yep, you still need to put it together, but you have no risk of delay because of manufacturing. And yes, it's expensive, and yes, it takes a long time to build that up, but it allows us to beat competitors in our lead times by months usually. And we're 2 or 3 weeks, where they're 16 or 20 weeks, and it makes all the difference in the world. So that, and Mike, I think it gets exactly what you're saying about Costco versus Walmart, the inherent simplicity of what we're dealing with. It's expensive and it takes time to build up, and et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it's a huge advantage for us.
Yeah, there's always trade-offs, I think, to choosing the more leveraged path, and maybe it's cost, maybe it's spending on tools, maybe it's simplifying or lower SKUs or less variety or something like that. But you can't optimize for something if you don't know what's on the other side of it. And I think we're seeing companies increasingly. The reason that the WhatsApp, I was reading about this last week, the reason that the WhatsApp acquisition was even possible with, a 50-person team to be a $20 billion company was because they were spending like some ungodly, like dozens of millions of dollars a year on Twilio and AWS. And they just relied so heavily on these outsourced services that they had a completely, an incredible like risk and exposure to them. And they were spending a huge amount on them, but it did increase their kind of per employee leverage. And it was a huge trade-off that they made there. Mm-hmm. So, those decisions are everywhere. You got to, if you are optimizing for leverage, you're going to make those. And some companies are, and some companies aren't going to want to do that.
I'll just add a Peter Kaufman thing in here too, which is relevant. I think it's just like, velocity he always talks about velocity being important, but velocity is both speed and vector, right? Like direction. Mm-hmm. So yes, leverage can be really powerful, but if you're going to apply leverage, make sure you pick the right direction, because let's say like Yellow Pages were a fantastic cash flowing business model for many, 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 many years, and wonderfully leverageable until it wasn't, and it could not adapt to the new world. So, and same thing with Buggy Whips and Kodak film and everything. But anyway,
great point.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. You guys feel good about these 4 and like the model generally, and you want to kind of dive into application? Any other questions?
Okay. I don't see any hands, Ben. So, or cool. Eric, let's get moving.
Cool. Blas, if your dad is Blas Buggy Original, that is absolutely hilarious. I love
I love this. That's his sarcasm, because it's not true.
Yeah, I'm the Buggy Original. He's the improved version.
Yes. How humble of you. I'm sure you deserve full credit. Yeah. Okay. This I hope is readable for you. I might have to go into present mode. But I've got a different version of this here. If not, what's happening? Is the small print readable or not particularly?
Looks pretty good on my end.
Thumbs ups, either way.
Some no's. Yeah, let's give it a shot.
This is my first attempt at like a leverage map, which is like what I would use or will use hopefully to like triage through a problem and say like, let's look at a company or a project or a product or a team, and let's look at where they actively have leverage in each of these categories. What are the resources available? What's actively being applied to the problem? Where are we driving the outcome? And then looking at like kind of what's near at hand available, like what's on deck or idle or unused that's within reach. And then maybe like what is a possible application that we could look at, and whether any of these would solve the problems. And it kind of gets us to hopefully like what is a clear next step or a few clear next steps, and like maybe what's our 3 or 6 month kind of problem solving roadmap if we need to look kind of down into that next. But separating out by category and looking at, what are the resources applied, what are the resources available from a leverage perspective. So this is what I like have organized-ish. I'd love to run through a couple of these. I have editable versions of this on the next slides. I can run through very quickly. Like this is just kind of what I put together for my project, the Almanac. Like these are the tools and things that I had available. I basically set aside 10 grand for like, mostly went to staff and support and experts and editing and publishing and design. These were the tools I had available. And at different times I had to kind of like get stuck and then go looking for the next resource, or have the next resource like show up and be like, hey, you need me right now. And so this is just like a rough kind of piece. And if I looked at like what's coming next, I'm looking at, I hired like Jesse to run a book club. And there's, there's royalties now to reinvest. And I now need kind of some more tools to, get to the next project, the next step. Now we need Slack for the community and Omela to collect, tickets for the book club and, more like live presentations. And so this is like how I would look at adding leverage and maybe where I'm bottlenecked and what kind of the next thing would be.
And Eric, if you're looking at this, I'm guessing the people leverage is the most expensive and difficult to scale. Is that the right way to think about it here?
It is. It's going to depend on the project. I think in this case, like the most expensive was definitely the publisher, followed by the copy editor. Interestingly, like I think the email list and like readers are now like I would add to this now readers. So before the book launched, there was no one evangelizing the book or recommending it because no one had read it and had a great experience. But now that there are people who are, like there's somebody on Twitter today who's like, the two best books I read this year were Atomic Habits and the Almanack of Naval Ravikant. And then like, I'm sure that'll sell somewhere between 20 and 100 books. And that was like a reader who went upon himself and did that. And that is like frictionless leverage from my perspective. Like I worked hard on the product to earn that, but there was no marginal cost to that leverage. And I think there's something interesting about like audiences and email lists. And I mean, that's probably a lot of what explains Joe Rogan's podcast, frankly. Like he has productized himself or any of the podcasts really. Like there's no marginal cost to a growing audience size, which both increases earnings and increases growth, like incremental growth rate. And so while it is more expensive to kind of add experts and add employees, it is not necessarily more expensive to add, or very, very expensive marginally to add audience or add fans or add, something like that. So,
and it's the power of bundled platforms, right? Like you're saying, it's multiple levers in one that kind of gives you this outsized output.
Yeah, I think that's and the fact that it's essentially uncapped. And so I think a lot of the extreme outcomes that we see comes down to the fact that like you can think about it like lever arms are much longer than they have ever been before. Like even the Beatles 50 years ago could not have reached 100 million people in parallel the way we can through Spotify and YouTube and everything now. Like there was even 20 years ago, there's one channel, it's like MTV or NPR or whatever to like break through in a musical sense. And now you can be a comedian without having gotten on the Late Show. You can and you can serve constantly like millions and millions of people. And so it is maybe less the limit on short lever arms is now gone with the internet. And so the extremity of the length of levers for some of these people that keep compounding, like the combination of an audience compounding and the uncapped nature means that like it just kind of keeps going to staggering degrees.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And it might be interesting. You said the publisher and the copy editor were the most expensive or the most difficult. This might be an interesting lens to see where we might be able to apply a platform or a lever to these gatekeepers of sorts, right? Because if we were able to find people to copy edit or to publish somewhat frictionlessly, it might add a length to one of your levers.
Yeah, I think, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the margin of each of those, you can look for kind of improved margins on each lever, right? And so you can look for, how, I mean, frankly, I had a lot of friends as peer readers early on that like probably it took the cost of a lot of professional editing out, because I kind of accrued enough different people who were like, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense, I don't like this organization, that I could kind of derive ideas from that. And that was more expensive time wise for me, but less expensive cash wise than like hiring a professional editor who's smart about structure and things like that. So, again, trade-offs and margins of each application. Let me get caught up on chat here because we got some. Santi, what's up? Miss you, dude. This is like a little Capital Camp reunion in here. Does every type of leverage have a red queen effect, efficient market arbitrage where it gets more effectively priced over time, and therefore is the game to find the type of leverage when it's really cheap? It's a very good question. I think there are probably like emergent cheap leverages. I think there are also probably, like when things come in at the frontier, like Facebook ads were cheap when they first started and Google ads were cheap when they first started. And like, that's an arbitrage there. I'm not sure if it is like harder for a new Twitter user now to gain more followers than it was, 10 years ago. So I'm not sure. It's really hard to generalize. I think like some platforms are going to probably have red queen effects that really get scary and competitive and things get like priced up. I think other things are going to have really like writing as an example is like, I think there's a huge arbitrage around writing, because writing as a skill, like there are so many writers and they are very cheap. It's cheap to buy writing, it's cheap to buy content essentially. But there is a lot of margin on top of that if you can assemble the right writing in the right way. So like the writers have had their margin compressed, even though the output of it is very valuable. I don't know. Santi, you want to direct me a little more? Like, am I answering your question at all?
I can't think of any form of leverage that doesn't get pushed towards a more efficient price, where the game to get really lots of leverage seems to be early on it. Like Rogan could not be Rogan if he started today. And I mean, when you think of financial leverage, then there's like a mechanism to price it in a way that is priced correctly. I'm sure Twitter is going to be the same in 10 years if it's still around. Facebook and Google, you see that dynamic. So anyways, it seems like a lot of the game is being early on the leverage. It just came about as a thought.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, there may be either earlier to apply a technology, first to apply a platform. You may get higher margins at least from that. And so like, there's definitely still, the equation may work later, but it might work better for people earlier on. I don't know, maybe case specific.
Right. The next guy who puts the book together on Naval is probably not going to get the leverage on it.
Is that true? I mean, I can imagine a better book on Naval, right? I mean, he may have another biographer. He may have another, there's a lot of different takes. And if he,
the guy who gets his Twitter notes and his podcast and puts them together in the book is probably not going to get as much leverage.
Yeah, probably.
This is not a particularly insightful comment, but like people who started these big podcasts or got the big Twitter followings or whatever, if they started early on Twitter, they didn't know that was going to be valuable, right? There's a lot of people who started early on a lot of platforms where it was worthless. I think the risk reward is better to build something after the platform is established or the type of leverage is established.
Yeah, I guess there's a question on like whether does it matter that Joe Rogan was early, or does it matter that he had a lot of time to compound, or is it some combination of the two? Right.
I mean, if you know a platform is going to work, like, I mean, PewDiePie or something has advantages from being early and compounding the followers, but no idea that like e-gaming or game streaming was going to be a valuable place to spend your time.
Yeah. Okay. Luke, if you could put the optimal use of leverage on an XY plane with the time on the x-axis and leverage on the y-axis, what might your sketch look like? I am so glad you asked. This is in the appendix that I wasn't sure I was going to get to. So
Love
this is
to hear
something.
it. You don't need to jump ahead if you don't want to in your presentation.
No, this is like this was in my like, I don't know how I'm gonna like. This is not an organic leap, but it is like if we go to 301 or whatever, if people ask, like, I want to be ready for this question. So this is a really interesting one to me because I think there's like, along with each margin, like each application of leverage having a different kind of margin. So some of them are only accessible to you later on, even if they may be higher margin. So this is something like is just a few examples. Come on, clicker, click. There we go. So there's a lot to nitpick about this as an example, but I'm just thinking like, if we look at just capital and we to put time on the x-axis, most people can accrue cash by saving money, 5%, 10%, 20, 50% of their income. And then they can invest. And so like you go from, your savings, like interest rate in your savings account to investing in index funds to eventually maybe founding a company and using your own cash to do it and owning all your own equity and upside. And so, not only are you going up in absolute, but like numbers and capital leverage, but the slope is going up as you're like increasing your earning power faster.
So you would see it as exponential?
I think it'll look exponential if you just look at the line, but you can break down how that reinvestment is going. And I don't know if it's exponential truly in like the mathematical sense of exponential, but it's certainly accelerating growth, right? This one's maybe a little bit more of a stretch just because it's less mathematical, but you can like use pre-existing tools, even if it's a little round peg square hole. So that my handwriting is terrible, but that says like automations, right? So maybe you start with like Zapier and Webflow, and then you get into like, using much more expensive, maybe custom tools for your particular business that have higher margin for you, but take more money to invest in, and they result in faster growth. But they take more upfront investment and certainty and judgment, right? So time isn't the only thing that you imagine progressing here. You also imagine, like we talked about with Mark earlier, like increasing conviction that marginal, that bigger investment is going to be worth it, and that you're going to want to keep investing in the growth of that project, and that you're not, yellow pages in the 80s or whatever.
Okay, that's helpful. I guess another question on top of that is, how do you think about re-leveraging whatever you're working on?
You mean reinvesting in leveraging, or do you mean
reinvesting and leveraging?
Yeah, I think this is go ahead.
I was going to say, like, at the onset, the time horizon when you're thinking about it.
I'm not sure I understand the second part. I mean, I think like if you're doing something, most of this is in a business context, so you're thinking about this as how do you do more of the thing, or add scale or add speed to the thing that is generating profits? Like, how do you reinvest those profits in more speed, more scale, more acceleration? And I think that's where, that's kind of where this comes along. Like when you look at this leverage map, like, when you have capital piling up, and you're like, I got a lot more capital than I have leverage in these other categories. Let's look at, what's available, what's next, what costs money, what's the next highest ROI thing to do with this money. There's not capital piling up. Like maybe you do things that you like, there are alternative forms of leverage. Like how do you get your audience bigger? How do you use your time, as to increase this leverage? How do you maybe put that into productization, or, building or finding the right tools that are going to help you do more faster, so that that capital does pile up for reapplication. Is that helpful, Luke?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it is. I think it's helpful,
Okay.
Especially seeing that the map you built out.
Okay.
So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think like when I went through one of these case studies before, I just asked somebody like, what sort of cash do you have? What are the resources now, and how do you earn to kind of like start to get an idea of like what that cycle looks like? But none of the stuff that, that guy had, he had created an amazing course. He had an email list, he had some cash, but like he had all this low hanging fruit around like activating his existing audience and previous students that didn't cost any money at all, that was like actually both the most effective thing to do and, you know, no cost from his capital pool, which is a great place to find yourself. And so like, if the next most expensive thing or next most beneficial thing to do doesn't cost you any money, like great, let the capital pile up and wait until there's, you know, a tool to buy or a person to hire or whatever.
Absolutely. It definitely makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Santi, help me out with this question. Role of ideas in the spectrum of leverage.
Just ideas seem like massive leverage if employed correctly, but I don't know where in your categories it qualifies.
I think it's the like foundation of the whole thing. I wish there's something in here that I wish I had put, which is like the, you know, leverage is the third step after specific knowledge and accountability. Then you apply leverage to this thing that you have that's working. But I think the idea, like, you know, your skill and judgment is the foundation of the whole thing, right? So if your idea is, you know, you're Jim Simons and your idea is like, hey, let me find this, you know, trading arbitrage that is an automatic, you know, rule and write this algorithm that just like makes, you know, 10% a year, no matter what I throw, no matter what the market does, then your job becomes, okay, how do I put as much money against this as possible, right? If you're Elon Musk and you've just got this design for a Tesla, now the problem is like, how do you pump out as many Teslas and sell as many Teslas as you can? And it's an extension of that core idea, right? I think that's the catalyst of the whole thing. And the game is like, get an idea worth leveraging as far as you possibly can. And some of these ideas, you know, to some of our previous kind of like, what are the limitations of it? When should you stop leveraging it? Like, I don't know. There's no reason to stop leveraging whatever the hell's happening in the Renaissance fund. You know, Warren Buffett seems to like continue to compound his capital effectively, no matter how big the pile gets. But other things fall apart, you know, or get over leveraged. And so it's like, there's an awareness of the quality of the idea versus the size of the leverage you're applying to it, I think. But, you know, I think if you look at like, I don't know how you'd classify Jeff Bezos's idea, but he clearly is like one of the most leveraged people on the planet. He's got, you know, and Apple is probably not too far behind. You know, the most cash, the most credential, the most employees, the most brand, the most fans, like, I think because of the quality of the idea and execution and consistency of those things, right?
Yeah, I guess it just gets, I mean, I think an idea is just part of, I think the idea is like another column, and it's like the fountainhead of what gets leveraged. And it's a leverage stack. So Bezos saying, wait, the internet's growing a bazillion %. That idea was the fountainhead of the leverage of, wait, you can sell books. That's another idea that was on top of the original idea that got stacked on top of another thing that got stacked. So anyway, the idea, it seems like a fountainhead of like you're saying, kind of what can get leveraged.
Yeah, that's
you need
interesting.
an idea. So anyways, and some ideas are better than others. So some ideas have more leverage than others.
For sure. Yeah, I guess I don't know how to, the idea isn't represented here, which is, maybe a failing of the framework. I don't know, that's interesting.
And Eric, maybe it's something along the lines of there are levers that are more valuable, right? So if you put people sort of at the bottom, right, it's less effective, less efficient. Maybe the idea is the ground that this hierarchy sits on, and as you move up, the capital or judgment is sort of at the top of that, where maybe it's the rarest, but it's also the most valuable. And it's interesting, Santi, your question before reminds me of that Nick Kokonas podcast with Patrick. And I thought it was so interesting how he takes these ideas, Black-Scholes model and pricing and risk arbitrage and all that, everything he learned as a derivatives trader, and he applied it to restaurants. Maybe there's some space here for that, not necessarily as mathematical, but, is there some mystery around this thing? Is it mispriced, right? Is it unrecognized? And, I think it goes to each one of these ideas, each one of these levers, and it's a spectrum, right? It's not just good or bad. There's, better ideas and worse ideas, Santi, like you said, and certain people are more effective, whether you're a programmer or just a manual laborer. But maybe thinking of this matrix as a hierarchy of sorts rather than as a grid, maybe is a different way to maybe frame it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting, I think different categories are helpful for different people in different times, and different problems. Yeah, I think, Santi, I think you're right. There's something like, there's no individual idea that I think is so infinitely extensible that it doesn't need to get revisited, probably with each like go round of the reinvestment, re-leverage cycle. I wrote one book, but like, am I going to reinvest that capital into another book, into, a different, like, and then in what direction? And then, yeah, it's a good, I don't know, it's a good push. We got a couple more chats in here. There, questions. Michael's got an example from, the recapture Duolingo. Yeah, that's a cool one. I think there's a lot of like community as leverage, like as an audience, right? The open source community, there's like companies built on top of open source software. There's, Wikipedia is like huge community leverage. Yeah, the recapture Duolingo one. Ben Hopkins, interesting to explore where the unrecognized leverage is. Got any examples for us, Ben?
I'm sort of hoping to pick up some examples from you guys. I just think it's sort of go back to that sort of arbitrage idea where I feel like Facebook ads and sort of Twitter sort of so saturated and fully exploited. I'm just sort of wondering where the next sort of unrecognized bit of leverage lies, maybe.
One thing,
TikTok, is it some sort of social media thing? I've got no idea, but could be something interesting.
One thing I was thinking about too, this is more of a, I don't know, a suggestion or something maybe that might be useful, but that I'm thinking about the metaphor of leverage as being a lever from the Archimedes principle and stuff, I think is where everyone goes to. And I honestly think it sometimes trips people up because they're like, wait, who's doing the pulling and what's being, and where's the fulcrum? Like, you know what I mean? Like it can kind of be a little, but it seems like, and maybe it was the advertising example that got me thinking like in this way, or even Shark Tank, right? Like what they want to invest in, if they're investors, they want to, the metaphor they use is I want to like throw gasoline on a fire that's already burning, right? So, which I never thought about as leverage, but it almost is another metaphor for like, basically taking something that's working and then exponentialize it or whatever. So, right. So like, I'm also trying to think like, well, what other things are there, call them metaphors, mental models that are actually leverage in disguise that I have never thought about as leverage. So I don't actually use it as leverage. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I feel like we sort of touch on sort of the stuff that we're all involved with the lattice work is, leaping emergent effects with teams and things like this, sort of unrecognized. Just can't quite quantify it. I'm just trying to think.
Exactly. Yeah.
Slightly different of it. Yeah.
Do you guys, anybody want to do a little guinea pig case study? See if we can walk through this and maybe triage somebody's actual like problem or question or project or product or something through this and do it live together.
Anyone have anything in mind? Santi, thank you. Well, Eric, let's put it out there. If somebody does have something in their personal life or their business or whatever that they would feel comfortable and excited to sort of talk through, let's do that right after this. But I guess let's give people a minute or two, and Eric, maybe you and I can dissect Lattice in a way.
Yeah.
Cool. Do you want my input or do you want to try to roll with it and I'll course correct you along the way?
Let's start with like either what sort of capital have you put in or where are the sources of capital? What are you starting with and what are the sources of capital?
Yeah, so I obviously haven't taken on anything and I've outsourced everything that I can. So I'm not technical, I'm not a developer. So the tool and the back end and some of the things on the website I've outsourced, but really the website's relatively simple. It's more of the tool that'll let people highlight and take notes and communicate with each other. And over time, that'll build a little bit. So we're in the process of creating a little bit more of a built out back end where you can see your compilation of notes and highlights and over time be able to create a lattice work of your own. So Eric, you've taken, 1,000 notes and 500 highlights, and you can kind of compile that into a network diagram, a lattice of your own, and being able to do that for each person and then as a community. So that type of stuff is not in my wheelhouse. So we'll need to outsource that. So tools, yeah, Memberful, which is built on top of Stripe, which is huge. Members, books, podcasts. I don't know if that all fits into people, but just these lessons I've learned over time.
Yeah. So so as far as people leverage go, like we've got the members who are obviously like paying and being a part of it, and here's who we are, today.
Yep.
We've got, did you say you hired developers to build some of those other tools?
Yep.
Okay. Anybody else that you've hired or that has contributed, is a community putting in, like creating to the content, or is it just only the layer on top?
Yeah, eventually. So still early days with the tool and everything, but people are adding notes and highlights. And then got to call out Luke, who's been a huge help in terms of thinking through things and being a brainstorming partner throughout all this.
Cool. Are there other tools other than Memberful that you use?
WordPress, I guess, would be the kind of key one that the site is built on top of, and some back-end stuff like, we use Heroku, and if we eventually need to do some cloud database stuff, we'll go to that. Upwork is where I found the developers on, so maybe we can include something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's good. That covers most of it for now, at least.
Okay. And then the products that we've got. So obviously the website to start with. Yep. We've got these sort of like recorded Zoom calls, sessions, I guess you'd call these session recordings. What are the other kind of like maybe evergreen, either digital, physical, like products that you've got out there? Or
so again, early days, but thinking through what this looks like as we roll out, but some sort of deep dive into a particular book with the author, or just as like a mini book club of sorts. So get a few people together and go really deep on that. Could do something similar with an idea, which is kind of what we're doing today, right? Like, let's take one idea and see how we apply it to different people's lives, or, can we push our thinking on it and understand it a little bit better? And then we've done a couple of these for the ideas we have uploaded, but kind of one pagers of sorts that makes it easy to refer back to, right? So it's not this 2,000 page monstrosity that you can't print, and how do I refer back to it? It's, can we take the essence of this idea down and distill it as much as possible so that at the end, maybe it becomes a 150, 200 page book, and each idea is just one page. And that's a little bit down the line. We'll need to get these ideas uploaded and get input from the community and all that. But I think eventually that'll be a pretty powerful product, if you want to call it that.
And you think of that as a book, kind of as a destination on its own?
I think so. And, it could be, honestly, you've inspired me kind of the way that you've thought about the Navalmanack, where if you want a beautiful book, whether softcover or hardcover, it's X amount of dollars. If you want it for free, you can download it and it's here for everyone. And then partners still, of course, get access to kind of the community and the complete idea, these types of calls and all that. So I don't know. Yeah, I haven't finalized my thought on it, but I think it would be a good way to sort of intrigue people into it.
Got it. So is a fair goal, like, or at least we can use this as an approximation. I know I realize it's more nuanced than like lets you grow the number of members, because it gives a very like kind of qualitative community feel to this. But is that a reasonable like proxy for a near-term goal? Is the goal much more like you want to reach a certain level of like product before you push on that harder?
Yeah. So definitely the latter. So trying to get the tool that we're building a community on top of into a really good place before trying to share it with others and add fuel to the fire. So, the people on this call know quite well, but the tool is still rather buggy. Some of the core actions work well, I would say, but we still have a decent way to go until we feel really excited and ready to try to pour gasoline on top of this thing.
Okay. So your goal is like tool readiness.
Yeah, I think
that's your next like milestone that you're driving towards. And okay, so the main contributors to the like tool readiness are what? Is that developer energy? Is it feedback? Is it, like what are the developers constrained by, I guess, and are they the only input to the tool's readiness?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest bottleneck is the developers, and we're looking to bring on maybe one or two more to kind of alleviate that somewhat. But we've gotten a ton of good feedback from the community, and people reaching out and saying, I found a bug here, and this is working well or this is not working well. So that all feeds into what the developers are doing, obviously.
Okay, so the people provide feedback from the community. As an input to that, you want actually the additional developers to kind of contribute and move things along faster. What's preventing this, one or two more developers from getting added in the near term?
We're interviewing right now and going through that process. So I don't think it's a solvable problem. Just trying to find the right person to do
time.
it.
Yeah, time and people. Is it capital constrained at all?
No, not at this point. We're looking to do kind of part-time work, not hire a full-time developer with SF prices and all that stuff. So more like friends of friends, somebody's looking for a part-time project or are interested in this thing and want to contribute in a small way. So yeah.
Okay. So if this is our kind of nearest approximation to the thing that will move the goal forward the most, then let's scan our kind of like existing levers, right? Like above our dotted lines here, and see like what are all the are there ways that we can use our existing tools, products, people, or capital to bring this along faster, right? So like, have you asked everyone on this call whether or not they are or know a developer that you might want to work with, that's like in budget and shares the vision and shares the stack of like what you're trying to build?
No, have not.
Yeah. So like, that's maybe a starting place. And we know that, I assume that there's like some research around, there's not a pre-existing open source solution for what you're trying to build, and it's got to be custom built and, on top of existing tools.
Yeah, that's where I started. I was hoping to be able to just kind of play something, but
I bet
I didn't think anybody was doing it well at all. So, we're starting super simply and relatively cheaply, but I think we're getting to a pretty good spot pretty soon.
Okay, cool. Any other, Luke's already working on it. Is that what it sounded like?
Yeah, so he's not technical either, but in terms of having someone to be on the other end and hear my stupid ideas and call me out when I'm going down the wrong path, that's where he's been super helpful.
Good. Cool. So looking at this, I mean, do you have different clear next steps than you would have 15 minutes ago?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't honestly think about bringing in the community as a developer, and maybe somebody directly is or would know somebody. I think that would be a great step. And if there's anybody on the call, would love to kind of hear from you in that way. And then I guess the other thing is trying to balance the tool readiness with growing the community appropriately. Would rather go slowly and kind of bring the right people on board and make sure we keep this feel right where it feels trusting and it feels homey, if you will. That's definitely more the goal than just kind of say, let's grow the numbers.
Sure.
And then on the content side, we have a long way to go. Like half the ideas or so are uploaded at this point, and I'm relatively close to being able to upload a few more kind of disciplines over the next coming weeks or so, let's call it. But that's kind of the third leg, the third bottleneck, if you will, in terms of getting this to a better state.
Okay. So make these the kind of the main like next goals
Yep.
in each one. And so even though we got a lot of ideas on the product side of things, but really the next is finish the lattice work, right?
Yep.
Hey, Blaz, it's my question for you.
Yeah, shoot.
Have you given thought to whether or not the tool itself is productizable? Like, is there a market for, an API that could be plugged into Medium or myblog.com that allows other writers and sort of content purveyors out there to buy this tool from you?
Yeah. So yes, absolutely. So from the bottom up, we've built this tool to be able to be decoupled, and it could be a standalone thing. The thing I've learned, and we'll find out over time, but there's a couple people, Hypothesis is one who does an okay job, and they're sort of more geared towards academics and research papers and stuff like that, but it's a very clean, nice annotation tool. Maybe you've heard of genius.com. It was like a rap lyrics database, and they had some fallout with the founders, and I think they hit some hard times for whatever reason, and they pivoted at least somewhat, and they now have this Genius annotation thing. And it kind of feels like a pivot, and they haven't added any features or improved it at all in the last year, let's say. So I don't know how committed they are to sort of building that out. But my thought process on this, Mike, is you kind of need to start with a group of people that you know and trust and sort of like to learn with, because you go to random website and you see Joe Schmo has added a comment or a highlight on there. And again, maybe this is me, but that's sort of a turnoff. Like, why would I care what Joe Schmo has to say about this thing? But if the understanding is the people who are able to comment are, at least for now, kind of part of Latticework, let's say. And maybe the next step is, if you're part of the Latticework, you can use this tool to comment on anything, any website or PDF or something like that. There's some inherent trust built within that system. You trust the community, you trust the process through which people are sort of vetted and become part of this thing. And I think that would be far more interesting in terms of annotating and reading other people's perspectives and learning from that process, rather than just it being totally horizontal and opening it up to the entire world. So, it would be the dream come true one day would be to have like this type of community plus a Naval or a Paul Graham, and like how fascinating would it be to read an article or anything that they've come across, and rather than them just tweeting it and with some quick blurb or something, you can really see hopefully a little bit more in depth how they thought about it, what they thought were important, if they added any tags or anything like that. So long term, yeah, Mike, I think that's really, really exciting, but it's sort of like a gating sequence. Like, we have to get through steps 1, 2, and 3 before that should become a possibility, at least the way that I'm thinking about it today.
Cool. Yeah, Blas, I didn't realize how you were like really kind of trying to almost hold back membership until you had this tool ready.
Yeah. So the wait list is a bit of a cheap way to kind of say it, I guess, because if you wanted access just to that first discipline, you sign up for the wait list and you get access to that first thing. But we have like upwards of 5,000 people on that wait list now.
Wow.
And it's even if it's a small percentage of those people who do want to join, it's a sizable community. So again, it's doing it, kind of growing it properly, making sure we get the right people, and it's not just a free-for-all where the culture sort of devolves and you just get random people on there, and you lose some of that like high-level discussion that we're hoping to build with calls like this and the tool and all that good stuff. So yeah, it's kind of like, you can sell billions of dollars, or billions of nickels or billions of dollars at a nickel, right? And that's fantastic, but do you really want to pour gasoline on that? And it goes back to all these things we were saying before. I want to prove out the onboarding structure and the tool and the content and all these things that are, to be honest, just an experiment at this point. And everyone on this call is nice enough to put up with it in these early days. And it's it's nowhere near perfect, but that's what we're trying to kind of iterate on and get better over time. So if we do want to eventually say, our goal now is not tool readiness, but community growth, we're in a position to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think that waitlist is a huge asset as well. I mean, there's a lot of interested people in there for sure. I haven't done anything really with the newsletters, and the rabbit hole has sort of served as a trust mechanism these last couple of years too, where people I think understand this is not just a
get rich quick scheme. There's people who really care about learning and these ideas, and early days, but I think I'm at least excited about it.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, it's funny how we think we have a comprehensive map, and then the more we talk, the more we're like, oh, actually, oh yeah, we got a member list, got a huge wait list. Oh yeah, Blazo has a whole other website that has its own mailing list. Oh yeah, we actually have like a lot at our disposal.
No, it's super helpful. This is really fun.
Cool. Any other guinea pigs? Mark, Clayton, what are you working on? Clayton's always got something to leverage. And I see Sean down there too. Sean, I haven't talked to you in forever, man. How are you? Sean's probably doing juggling practice while he's listening. Whatever. Yeah. Good. Sean's got intelligent child juggling. Sean writes Intelligent Fanatics, which is super wonderful if you haven't read that already. Sorry. What were you saying, Clayton? I interrupted you aggressively. Got all excited about Sean. Cool. Real estate photography. Sweet. I mean, we got a relatively small group. So, I mean, questions, we want to triage, like Mark, if you want to run through your product, like I'm totally down. Or if you guys just want to give like feedback on this thing as a whole, like even, you drop in the chat, like a number out of 10 on how helpful or interesting or unique or novel this is. Like these are ideas I'm exploring that I'm like, this is actually like one of my first times talking to other people, like outside of a one-on-one session about it. So I'm really trying to get a feel for like, is this useful, interesting, valuable? So like you can't hurt my feelings. The truth is the only helpful answer.
I would echo Michael and say 10 out of 10 on the interesting scale. One question I have for you, Eric, is do you think there's any, like, what's the correlation, or is there one between like how expensive and difficult a lever is to either get or use, and then how effective it is? And I'm trying to play around with this because I've heard it kind of both sides from the people side. Mm-hmm. So it's super maybe cheap to have, a product and then get it in front of, real quick, people, friends, family, right away, but it might not go anywhere from that. But I'm sure like also same with people in the relationship side, it more like the who not what And if like you get, in front of like the one right person who connects it to the perfect community or whatever that product needs, then the lever's huge and massive. And so it's like, well, it's really expensive to find and connect with that perfect matching relationship for that product. Mm-hmm. But it's super effective. Is that always a correlation, you think?
I think is a very well articulated question, and I think it comes back to a little bit like what Santi was asking, was like where's the arbitrage with a lever? And I think he's probably right that there's a correlation with being early and right. And I think it kind of comes down to like how efficient the market for that particular lever is, right? So how efficient is the market for people, for employees? I would argue like actually not that efficient, like a little bit efficient in that like an entry-level person is an entry-level wage and a senior level person is a senior wage. But within a senior person, you might be able to hire someone who's 10x as effective, but everyone's pegged to market rate compensation. So I think like on the one hand, you got to pay more to get a senior person, but you can really get a high margin out of hiring the right person at the right time. Or hiring someone who's, 2 or 3 times as attentive and proactive. And I think there's a huge margin in that. I think on the tool side, almost all tools by definition are high margin tools if they're applied the right way. If you're a lumberjack and you're trying to like take down a tree, that axe is going to pay for itself in like one tree. And that chainsaw is going to pay for itself by like tree 5. And, a tractor is going to pay for itself by like tree 100 or something like that. They're almost always like immediate to near-term paybacks because a well-structured tool by definition is pretty, if you know enough to know that you should be buying and applying that tool, it's a high margin thing. So a SaaS app that, you pay $10 a month for that buys you back, 1 hour a week is like 400% ROI, 1000% ROI. So you thinking of it that way, products, you know, we could record this session, and if we never shared the recording, you know, maybe it was no marginal benefit, but it was also very low cost to record. So there's people out there making podcasts that 3 people are listening to that, you know, maybe it costs $50, but every additional incremental listen like drops the cost of production per listen. And so I was talking to this guy from the Netherlands who's a course creator, and I asked him to like they're in the like tens of millions of sales of their online courses, and most of his leads come from SEO, and so like SEO from content goes into email funnel, goes into like a relatively high purchase price thing. And I asked him how he made like internal capital allocation decisions and whether he actually measured. I asked him if he would sell his company. He's like, I don't think so. I don't know where I would put my money to compound it faster. And I was like, oh, do you have any idea of what your internal return on invested capital is? He's like, not really broadly, but like I did this on my writing spend, and it was like basically a 2,000% 1 year IRR on like every incremental blog post compared to like the incremental like people and CAC that it brought in. I was like, yeah, never sell that motherfucker. You better keep that company. You better keep investing in that writing. There's nowhere you're going to put that cash if you sell that company that's going to get you $2,000. You know, there's probably a ceiling somewhere, but like he's actually kind of got some clever solutions for like getting around that ceiling. And he's like vertically integrated. And now he's going to start adding incremental courses that are within the same set of topics. So like might go down to 1,000% ROIC, but it's still incredibly good. So I do think each lever has a margin. I do think the margin is determined by your application, right? So like, what is your LTV? What is your CAC? You know, some of these just blurs into like, I don't know, you're going to have to do the math on your own business, and realize that you can go backwards if you apply leverage to the wrong thing. But if you have a competitive advantage and you have a profitable kind of like unit economics, then like there's higher margin and lower margin iterations of each individual lever, but you should be okay. And napkin math should probably be close enough. You know, and I know Brent likes to say, like, if you got to do more than napkin math, like it's not a good buy. So.
Yeah. And one thing I'd say, I'm hesitant to be a case study because like, I don't want to waste your time. And like, I know there's actually things I need to do. Like I have my head wrapped around the leverageable activities, but it's like, you know, a lot of it involves, you know, I have an ebook, I have a newsletter. I want to surround that with more supplemental materials for a larger kind of more deluxe package. That's more easily affiliatable because then you can give, but it's like, you need to make that stuff. There's always like just sit down and do the thing. And so to that end, like, I feel like one thing that this has me thinking about that I think you guys were just talking about is that, you know, I like the Capital Tools People products. It's like, you know, I would want to kind of put it on that like effort and impact kind of 2 by 2, you know, that there are things like the products are kind of a prerequisite. So basically if you plot things on like an effort and impact thing, you can start to get in an order of operations. So if I was telling someone, all right, here's how you start something ground up, right? Like, you know, high impact, low effort, start there. Like make a product completely free. You have a piece of paper and a pen, you can write a book. That is entirely free. And there's nothing stopping you from doing that. You know, then you can start to get into like, okay, for a few bucks, you can maybe upload that into a service that you can whatever. And then if you have that, you know, so I'm thinking about that too. I just know that the answer to all my problems is like, we'll get to work. You know what I mean? So I'm not an interesting case study right now, but
I appreciate you volunteering enough for me to volunteer you the rest of the way.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Is like, this is there's one of the most common questions I get is like, what is the 0 to 1 of using leverage, right? Like, I don't even have time to get started on using leverage. And I think that's like an interesting kernel to begin with, right? So like, in order to sit down and do the work, as you say, right? Like you need more time, right? Or more.
Oh yeah.
You need more time. And the way to get more time is to like replace the shit that's taking up your time. Like the triaging question I use is like, what is the stuff only you can do?
Yeah.
Right. So like, if you are the only one who can create your products, how do you use leverage to, you know, leverage isn't only about increasing the output. It can also be used to achieve the same amount of output in less time and free up that time gain that back so that you can invest in the things that only you can do and the higher margin activities for you, like creating another info product or whatever, your business is. So you mentioned you have an ebook already.
Yeah.
What was the other one you said you had?
Oh, newsletter. So I spent a long time gathering a list for something that I would eventually do. And now I have something, so I kind of was able to capitalize on that.
Okay.
There's going to be, additional products surrounding that. So course type material, flashcards, additional kind of white papers and things that kind of beef it up. So there's that type of stuff. From a people perspective, I'm using Twitter a lot for that and kind of networking there. I'm not sure if I had kind of created a separate Twitter account to kind of separate my normal life from like this more businessy thing. So, using that, friends and family, like some of the former coworkers who have found value in it. Now they're, so there's that.
What do you have as far as Twitter followers? And then what was the email list you mentioned?
Oh yeah. So, I was capturing emails for about a year before I even knew what I wanted to do. I just put it in my, I guess I captured like a couple hundred emails. So it wasn't many, but it was enough to then launch the newsletter, and I had people to launch it too. So that was good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brent. So we have existing ebook and newsletter. Future is like course, flashcards, and white paper, you said?
Yeah, white paper, maybe like text group, because it involves investing and trading and just kind of like reading in general about kind of that kind of world. So maybe text side, yeah, exactly, Discord type community type stuff, and then maybe even one-on-one, more premium stuff. So tools is it's Gumroad. It's this is why I wasn't sure about Twitter. Twitter is kind of a tool, but what am I using? Gumroad, Card, Canva for like graphics and things. I guess the Google Suite for writing. I have done Otter as just some dictation type stuff. I'm eventually going to do audiobook version. I guess that's another version of the product just to make it add more value. So that's free software that I'm using and editing software and things like that.
Okay. Cool. Capital starting with zero.
Yeah, no, basically everything. I was like all my savings and investments is kind of where I'm starting. I started the newsletter as having premium tiers, like paid tiers. So it's there from the outset, even though there's a free version.
Yep.
Same with, so, but yeah, starting from, basically just my own kind of money. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say like there are ways to apply leverage to the existing like time constraints that you have in order to move up, whatever your earning products are, or whatever your drivers of sales are, right? Whether that's Twitter or email. Like if you haven't already emailed those people, like that's super low hanging fruit, which it sounds like you maybe haven't yet. There's stuff like that.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah, you're right though. Like in terms of like freeing up time, well, one, focusing on the high ROI activities. I'm not great at that, right? Like I spend a lot of time doing stuff that needs to be done, but it's not maybe the best use of my personal time. So I think automation is something that can actually, it is a form of leverage, but it also frees up my own personal leverage, right? Like, so is that what you're getting at? Look at that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm not an expert in this by any means, but I really want to become best friends with somebody who's really, really good at Zapier. Cause I think that's like,
I was thinking Zapier. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, super, super high margin sort of investment is like the no code tools and stuff that are going on now and driving automations. And I've seen it happen at work incredibly well. But I think there's a lot of personal probably applications of it that I'm not an expert in at all.
And Eric and team, just one of our partners has offered to do a no code tutorial at some point.
Sweet.
And he's like built his whole life around it. And I've, stumbled through some of the zaps and, figured out some of the stuff, but I'm probably using like 2% of the, like what I should be. So maybe that's a good next call because I definitely don't know enough about it. And, some of these restraints might just be a technical restraint where it really doesn't cost that much money or that much time. You just need to sort of like sit down for an hour and figure out how this thing works and plug it into your email and your account and all these things. So that'll be a fun deep dive next.
Yeah, that'd be an awesome one. It's something that I like. within this framework, I've realized the power of the no code stuff, and I've been immediately trying to like learn and apply more of it, and maybe meet some of those automation people. Not being a developer myself at all, but yeah. Okay,
Cool.
so Blas, I think we're like 10 minutes ish left.
Yeah.
I'd love other questions. Like Matt's dialed in. There he goes. What's up, Matt? We still can't hear you, even though you're unmuted, and I don't know what to do about that. I appreciate the feedback, guys. This is very hot. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, just curious how you think the kind of rise of leverage and increase changes or inequality of outcomes over time. So I think a lot about like power laws in my investing, and I guess I've been thinking of them as fairly constant. Like you can read 100 to 1 in the stock market, and there were these power law outcomes a long time ago. But I guess I'm also thinking more that these are changing over time, and I guess your kind of presentation prompted me to think about it, that we would just see more and more extreme outcomes as a result over time. Like we talk about the Joe Rogan podcast, and there used to be a lot of different radio shows. Now there's like one radio show that has this massive reach, and there's a certain amount of attention. So yeah, just curious your thoughts on that, whether that's something that you'd agree with, and how you kind of think about that in terms of inequality of outcomes. Do these tools result in more unequal distributions?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think there's probably like I don't know, you get philosophical and political kind of quickly. I don't see any reason why the cap on growth and like the extension of the lever arms, I don't know what that would be other than regulatory, right? Like what is the growth, what is the limiter on the Amazon like growth continuity right now? It's like, I don't know, maybe just regulatory. But what's interesting, I think, is the niches are getting, maybe as the lever arms get smaller or get longer, the niches get smaller, right? And so in media, it's maybe easiest to observe that like, yeah, there's only one Joe Rogan, but it's not that there's one radio station. It's like that's one show, and we are now like PewDiePie is maybe a more interesting example, just because it's so unique, and it's a thing that like would have really struggled to get on through anything this broadcast, but now it's an incredibly long lever arm that is maybe more unique and niche, and so it's narrower vertically but significantly deeper, if you were to visualize it that way. And I think like it's one of these, if you are worried about the disparity of outcome, it's probably like concerning that there's no upper limit on the length of the lever arm. But if you're concerned about equality of opportunity, it's incredibly encouraging, I think. And so, there's much more lower barriers. There's much lower barriers to entry into like the marketplace of ideas, and certainly the marketplace of media, than there ever has been before. And that's turning into much more of a meritocracy than it ever has been, right? So like media in particular is a meritocracy right now, and it's just that the algorithms are the judges. And so anybody can create a TikTok and get 10 million followers overnight if you create the best TikTok of the day, or the week or the month or the year. And while that is an extreme outcome, an incredibly extreme outcome, it was an incredibly fair kind of like equality of opportunity. And anybody can start a podcast, and the same kind of rules apply, even though there's a lot more compounding there and less virality, and it's not driven by an algorithm so much as what we share and talk about and expand on from there. But I think like Bitcoin is maybe the most interesting example in all of this, in that like there's been a lot of software written over the last 40 years, and one of the programs written has created like $100 billion market cap thing out of thin air, and maybe it was one person, like we don't really know. And so that is equality of opportunity and incredible inequality of outcome. But it is still hard to decide where those extreme outcomes are going to happen and predict it. And it's maybe easiest to see in the things that compound over time, like like Joe Rogan or something like that, or like Amazon, kind of similarly. Like you probably could have spotted that a few years ago and predicted that there was no reason for that to stop. And where the ceilings are, or the next disruption comes, is as hard to predict as it ever has been.
Yeah, I mean, it also speaks to like the concept of like selling the picks and shovels in the gold rush, right? Like sure, Joe Rogan made a ton of money, but like you can look at, the massive boom of e-commerce facilitated by Shopify, right? Where like Shopify has made it possible for anyone to start a store overnight, basically. But that's great for like the Kardashians who like successfully launch a, clothing line or a cosmetics line. But it's been really great for Shopify shareholders, right? Like it's been like amazing for the people who actually sell the pickaxes. So I do think there's like the useful mental model to think about, like, well, where do you want to be in this value chain? Do you want to be the one mining for Bitcoin, or do you want to be the one like selling, graphics cards to all the people who are trying to build rigs, to mine Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's a great point. Eric, something you mentioned actually just really resonated around like the new niches that are created by these leverage tools. Because I'm thinking about, is the power law distribution becoming more unequal? Like it's possible just you're creating more niches to fill in all the different gaps along the way, right? So maybe I guess that's the positive angle on it. You're creating so much more value that even though there's way bigger outcomes at one end, you're like creating a lot more to fill in along the way as well. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah,
it's so optimistic. Sorry to cut in here, Eric, but if you think of even just podcasts and Spotify, right? People maybe 5 or 7 years ago even would say Audible or podcast, the market isn't that big, right? But there's so much unfilled space in your day, right? When you're driving, when you're taking a walk, when you're doing the dishes, you can actually listen to a book or a podcast pretty effectively in those dead times. And maybe the market for people who can listen effectively is 10x for people who could read, right? And it's not that they're illiterate, but there's limited time in the day, and when can you set aside 2 hours to read a book? It's hard. But if you have a long commute, if you're in LA like I am, then you can pretty, realistically and simply listen to several hours worth of books or podcasts a week just by driving. And I think that's sort of like the fractal nature of these things, right? Where it's not this zero-sum game where the pie is fixed, right? There's $100 billion and that's it. No, like you can get these Twilios and Snowflakes and these other companies that, kind of build something out of nothing in a big way. And I wrote it in there, but Brian Arthur does such a good job about talking about increasing returns. And he kind of takes this power law, biological perspective on economics. And we're not rational actors that do the right thing every time, right? It's very messy. It's a complex adaptive system. But it's fascinating to talk about. And yeah, Eric, you're on the leading edge of it.
Just trying to bumble it along. I think these are a good question. Maybe think of these things in new ways. I think a different example maybe of what Michael was saying, but like there is one Facebook, as a platform, but there are as many individual Facebooks from a like media perspective as there are news feeds, as there are users, right? So like podcasting is one market. There's a ton of individual shows of podcasts, but like we are all building our own radio channel, piecemeal, and we're incredibly fickle in how we do that. So like, Joe Rogan is popular today, but like there's no reason that he will be tomorrow, except that he's got the subscribers, and that compounding doesn't necessarily continue indefinitely. And it is very, the barriers of entry are so low that someone could do a better job tomorrow, and just the meritocracy has to speak and erode and like let all of that stuff go. Yeah, I think the mix of power laws and niche size is really interesting. And the crazy stuff happens when the niches are just so much bigger than we think they're going to be. I think that's when like the real, people who are even in the niches are like surprised at how big the niches turn out to be, which is just like a hill climbing algorithm, right? Like you're just kind of like trying to win the game that you're in, and then it turns out that the game had a huge prize because you were the only one who was eligible for the next tournament that nobody else knew existed, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think even podcasts, I could see like in the Australian investing space, there's probably like 50 more podcasts that could be launched. Like a lot of people think it's tapped out. I don't think so at all. I think there's just so much. You wouldn't be getting as big of an audience. You wouldn't get the whole world maybe, but you get that niche, right? And that's the kind of 1,000 fans or whatever is all you need.
Yeah, and I mean this. I think it's incredibly optimistic. Another reason for optimism, kind of like Boz says, is that like it has never been more true that there is always room for the best. Like there is always room for the best, and there is no reason that the best can't step into the ring at any time and get there. So yeah, I think that's. What are you saying, Michael? Podcast is actually a really particularly interesting medium because there's not really one true podcast network, very much a Wild Wild West. Yeah, totally. So email is the same way. Like nobody owns the protocol. There's no choke point the way there is with Netflix or Facebook. Nobody censors the content. Nobody even really like the distribution is taken for granted in ways that you can't on some of the other platforms.
So with that, guys, we're at 4:30. Time has flown. Eric, this was so much fun, man. And I'll send out an email to everyone, and we have a recording of this too. But for the people who are left and what we can share later, is there any ask for us? Is there anything that you'd like to hear about? Any feedback besides feedback? Is there anything else that would be helpful for you?
I mean, guys, this is a super helpful thing for me. Like, this is literally my first time making some of these charts and sharing them with people. So I really appreciate the questions and the feedback. I am trying to have as many conversations kind of like this as I can to try to get my head around these ideas. I'm hoping to kind of maybe slowly turn this into a course in the coming year or something like that. A course or certainly keep writing on these ideas and keep exploring them and see how predictive and instructive they can be for people. So it is helpful to hear that kind of stuff or to get these ideas challenged. Unless you blow smoke and then leave me down a dead end for a year of my life. So don't lie to me. Don't give me false hope here. But I appreciate it. Email me or DM me anytime. I'm easy to get a hold of, and feedback, questions, whatever. Like if you want to kind of one-on-one separately, like try to apply this to something that you're working on, you just didn't want to do it publicly, holler. I'd love to do that with you guys. So.
Awesome. Eric, thanks so much, man. This was really fun. And thank you all for joining. It's awesome to get everyone together and feel like this is pretty deep and valuable discussion. So it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's really cool to see this
applying mental models, man. That's what it's all about. This is what we're here for.
Yeah.
Long live the lattice work.
Thanks, brother.
I'd say particularly like making it interactive and like worksheeting it out, like whiteboarding it out was kind of cool.
Yeah, Blas and I were talking before. We like hopefully we can get more of the mental models, like close the gap between idea and application through different frameworks of these. I'm hopeful.
Yep, likewise. Well, thanks again, guys.
Thanks, Michael. Cool. Later.
See you guys. Bye.